this tonight. So I'd like to talk to you tonight about the business practices in regards to the missional work of the SBC, the organizational structure and operation mechanisms for greater kingdom work in light of the Southern Baptist Convention. I think what is very important to understand is we go through and we've now figured out the structure of a church, the entity setup, along with governing documents, that in business, there is three key areas that are always important in any organization to understand. What are they? Number one, that is the mission statement. Just as Paul in Philippians chapter 3 and verse 10 defined his mission statement for life, he stated that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being made conformable unto his death. The mission statement is a critical item. Before we get into the church, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, what is your mission statement and why do you exist? That is important to understand, especially those in the area of business. Sometimes we tend to look at business or money as the end all and everything. Unfortunately, that is incorrect. Our mission statement, just like the mission statement of the church, states that it exists for the purpose of what? Matthew 28, 18 through 20 and 1 Corinthians 1, 31 give us a good illustration. An example of a mission statement could be the church is a called out body saved by grace for the purpose of evangelizing the lost and edifying the believers to and for the glory of God. The mission statement states who you are. And basically, in three words, if you're taking notes, you would just state, who am I? That's an individual statement. That is also dealing as a corporate body, as a body of believers. It is the core essence of who you are. That is showing up in your incorporation because you state this is who we are. We're a body of believers at a certain location for the purpose of evangelizing the lost and edifying the believer. You take these things as your mission statement, no matter where you go or what, this is who you are. Churches usually will get away from their mission statement and define themselves differently. This is why it's important to evaluate your constitution and bylaws. By looking at your governing documents, that's where you will always go back to state who you are. It is important, especially in any founding of any church that is founded upon the principles of the Word of God first, and that stays as the crux in all governing documents. When we start to get into risk management and a variety of different things, a lot of churches are faced with the challenges of dealing with legal verbiage, legal activities, and it always will come back to what is written and what has been voted upon by the congregation. So the first thing in anything that we're going to be talking as we move forward is the mission statement. What is the mission statement of the church? The second part in business, in all business that we deal with, is the vision statement. What is a vision statement? A vision statement is a specific statement that details the strategy of the organization. It is interesting. The statement should be specific, detailed, customized, distinctive, and unique to that organization. It is interesting. God has given us many different churches and many different locations for many different ways to give the gospel out and edify the believer. I would love to say that no two churches are alike because God has allowed different people with different personalities to serve him in a different location. It is important to understand that vision statements, depending on what level you may be looking at and what evaluation or association you may be, should be lining up together. What is interesting, George Barna, in his book, The Power of Vision, many years ago, gives characteristics of a church's vision statement. This is what a vision statement should look like. Number one, it should be change oriented. There should be some movement. Just like if I have a starting point and I'm moving in a direction, I am going from one point to another. I am changing my position and location. So a vision statement must be change oriented. Number two, a vision statement must be challenging. And again, when we talk about challenging, when we get into further weeks, and especially in week 4, in the area of budgeting, you would see that your budgeting matches your vision. It shouldn't be your budget drives your vision, but your budget should supplement your vision. So it should be challenging. It may ask for people to be committed to a cause or a direction that is important in getting the gospel out and edifying the believers. Number 3, vision statements should be empowering. It is important that a vision
عند
statement is empowering
Okay.
to the people that will be carrying it out. A lot of times in leadership, especially leadership, it is the empowerment is left at the leadership level and is not integrated to the different people in the ministry. One of the things, especially with the business side of ministry, is sometimes people become very business minded, that they become no heavenly good. They look at the bottom line. That's not what this is all about. A vision statement needs to be empowering. Number 4, it needs to be long term. What do I mean by long term? It's not something you can complete in 2 weeks. A vision statement should be anywhere to 3 to 5 years out. Good ministries are always looking out. One of the greatest statements I think that was ever brought to me was, you live your life like the Lord is coming today, but you plan for 1,000 years, like he's coming way in the future. That is a very key in thought, is that you're always looking, what is beyond us? One of the greatest dangers in a lot of ministries is what we call kingdom building. And I'm not talking going out and taking the gospel out. It is people who are building their little empires inside the church for their protection. And as we start to see with an aging generation, sometimes people hold on to legacy. They want to be remembered for what they did. And by that holding on may be a detriment to an organization, and especially the vision and moving forward. It is interesting when you talk to people who are generational, 20 to 30 years apart, you start to see what those things did 20, 30 years ago. If those same people would put the same restrictions on they made people today, how the gospel would have been maybe crimped. We have to understand we always need to be looking out past us. Are you setting up a vision statement for your successor to fulfill? That is very interesting in that thought. Number 5, it needs to be customized. Vision statements are not cookie cutters. Now, are there a lot of similarities from our churches? Yes. Our gospel is to go out. There are not too many variances that we can do, but there is opportunities to take it and customize. I love the thing about our convention and working in this part of the world. We have such different cultures that we can't go and put a bunch of haoles from the mainland and put them in Hawaii or Guam or the Philippines or Japan and expect the same results. That's unacceptable. It's got to be customized. There's certain things that I love about Hawaii. One is a plate lunch. You can make the gospel through a plate lunch like you wouldn't believe, because it's something that is customized, unique. Now, if I ask and say in Hawaii, I'm looking all over the place for chicken kelaguen, well, that's a little bit harder. You know why? Because it's more customized to a culture in Guam, and I do miss it very much. for my Guam friends as always. 6, it needs to be detailed. Sometimes we love to put things out there high in the sky, but a vision statement needs to be detailed. Where do you want to go with this? It is important to be detailed. Now, that doesn't mean you always are going to have every answered or question answered, but it needs to have some substance and where you're going to go. If you're like a lot of us, if you try to drive anywhere, what do? Most of us, I usually hit my Google Maps. I plug in the destination because that's my vision where to go. And I want to be detailed in which time I take a turn or left turn. And like most men, if you don't ask directions at the right time, what could have been a 5-minute trip winds up being an hour and a half. But we need to be detailed in what we're doing. And then lastly, as you can see, a vision statement needs to be people oriented. That is a struggle in people who are so business minded that the bottom line is about the dollar. People are what are being changed spiritually, and God uses us for the purpose of setting the course to be able to take the gospel out, to be able to edify the believer. So, in this spot, 7 steps here, 7 areas that a vision statement is important. Now, I have to ask you again, in the definition, each church has a different vision statement. If I stop right now and ask you, can you think of one that represents your ministry? Do you know where you're going? Now, this may be in our group right now. We have a variety of different levels of people in ministry. We have pastoral individuals. We have people that handle the books and people who serve along wherever God allows them to serve. But could you articulate to anybody what is the vision of the church that you are in now? You don't have to answer that for right now. But if you can start to think that vision, next week when we start talking about your financial statements, and then especially in week 4 in budgeting, your budget starts to match that vision. You don't want to be spending resources God has given for the purpose of something that is not the vision. There's no sense of buying a bunch of equipment when in reality that money you're moving in a direction to be maybe more cloud-based or something of that area. That is dealing with the issue of vision. Now, with these 2 areas, you have who I am, that's my mission. Where am I going? That's the vision. The third part is how do I get there? And in business, we call those goals and objectives. What are goals and objectives? Every one of us should have goals and objectives. I naturally would like to be 6'2" and have a melodious voice like some of our pastors that can just speak eloquently. Unfortunately, as part of my goal and objective, there's something in this acronym that's very common within the business world that probably attainable. I have reached the limits of my height. I don't think I'm going to hit 6'2". And for some of you, I'm not even going to hit 5'8". I'll just be thankful for what I am. But here, like every organization, your goals and objectives are characterized by the term SMART. What do I mean? S is specific. Your goals and objectives should be specific. How do you get from point A to point B? If you're driving along again as an illustration, you know where your starting point is, you know where your ending destination is, you're specific. Make a left here, make a right there, make a right there. That is specific. It needs to be measurable. There should be some criterion for measurability. One of the things that churches struggle right now in the business area is they have no starting information. For example, how do you measure the growth of a church? Well, you may have to say our attendance this year was 62 people. We're taking our attendance, or we take the offering, or we take these things. The key thing is there's some measurable fact, and I'll come back to this in just a second. 3, it needs to be attainable. If you put a child in a room and you tell them to do something to attain to a certain level that is way outside of their ability or their knowledge or their capacity, it doesn't do any good to put that goal objective. It should be attainable. Sometimes you have to do things in small steps. Sometimes you can take a bigger step. There has to be some attainability of that goal that you want to do. The fourth one, it needs to be reasonable. Just like I used the illustration prior to this about trying to be 6'2", it is not reasonable for me to put out a goal that I'm going to be 6 foot. I am physically limited by what God has allowed me to be at my age and at my height. And I am very thankful that I'm not 6'2", because as a former submariner, I would not probably banged my head against many pipes along the way. So probably I am very thankful that God stopped me at 5'6". Now, instead of working outward, I'm trying to keep it inward. That's something that's reasonable and attainable. And this last part is timeliness. There should be some time frames. Sometimes you may do some goals and objectives in a 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, several months, a year, 3 years, 5 years. There should be some kind of time frame. It is like a lot of us are the kind of people is, if you don't put some time restrictions on it, that there's probably more than likely it's not going to get done. However, if there is accountability with that timeliness, then this becomes the goal. There's measures. You can see where you're going. Why is this all important? And what the reason I say that is that our goals should be broken up in both short and long range time frames. A short range goal could be a day, a week, or a month, and it can even be up to a year. Whereas a long range goal can be over a year to whatever. Good organizations usually have 3 to 5 year long-term goals in their, from a budgetary standpoint to a directional standpoint. We are living in a day and age right now that things are constantly changing and moving. So sometimes even 5 years out would be almost way too far out because of the nature of what is changing. Now, the great thing about even this year is a lot of churches have been able to adapt and change their long-term goals and had to shore up their short-term goals. Some are just trying to survive. Some are now moving in a direction as they move out. One of the things that in the business area is once we get past this and we get back to a time where we now can meet and have more interaction than what we do now, are we prepared for that? If that happens in 6 months to a year, are we preparing with a vision to be ready to go? For us on Oahu, we have a 4-tier system. And so now we've moved to a tier 2, but the question that we're looking vision-wise is what's going to happen when I go to tier 3 and 4? Are we ready to go? What does it take for me to get to the tier 3 and tier 4? That's where the goals and objectives come up to it. One of the greatest questions I always ask a lot of ministries is this: what are the goals of your ministry? It is very challenging for a lot of ministries because normally the goals of setting goals within a ministry are normally not measurable, i.e. someone's spirituality. How can you gauge somebody's spirituality? Are people growing? Are salvation decisions made? And that's what makes it very challenging when you start to put budgets together or you put direction of ministry, is how do you take things that are subjective and give them an objective measure? How do you put a number or a criterion against it? And that's one of the greatest challenges a lot of ministries face, because the question that comes into play is we are given a limited set of resources for the purpose of kingdom glory. As part of this, I'd like to throw in real quick, I have I think Poncho's heard this one already, but I really do have a discussion about stewardship. And again, I'd like to throw this out here. This is actually a 2 lesson thing that I have done, and I call it stewardship with the twist. As you know, I said last week, the interesting thing that we have to deal with is in the area of stewardship. What is by definition stewardship? It is a limited amount of resources that God has given us for maximizing kingdom work. That's what being a good steward. But it is interesting, it's not all about finances. And in fact, there are the 5 T's, being a good Baptist, that there's 5 T's, 4 we have on here. The other thing that we're supposed to be good stewards of is in the area of thanksgiving. Our worship to God, our giving of thanks is the 5th one. But take these 4 areas as a side note in the area of stewardship, because as teams are put together inside the church, as you put things together for business, it's not about the money. Please hear me right. It is not about the money. Stewardship is that taking all the resources that God has allowed us, and there are several ones. Number one is in the stewardship of talents. And you should challenge people. What is your calling? What has God called you besides being born again and saved? Some of that calling could be taking the skills and talents, and especially in the area of business, and being able to come alongside to help guide along those areas in business area. It's a vocation. It is great to know that the talents we have, especially as we go outside the church, that we can use those talents as a vocation to earn, be able to give those resources to help the church, local church ministry, and those around us as we serve Christ. Secondly, that we're supposed to be good stewards about is our testimony. One of the greatest challenges that we have in any ministry is character. It is disappointing to hear when we have individuals within ministries that their character drives people away from serving. I would hope, especially in the business area, that there are many needs and many responsibilities and accountability. And so character becomes very important. It is interesting, even as we've watched our political system, especially in the US side of it, over the last 6 months to a year, it is interesting that almost every character that comes up for office right now, you just wondering where their head's at. What are they doing? They're not known for being someone of high moral character. That is the same thing that has to be in the business area. We have to be of high moral character. And that perseverance, that testimony isn't just when we're young. It is interesting to persevere to the day the Lord calls us home. That is the second area of stewardship. The third is the issue of time. It is interesting, naturally, that redemption of time in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 16, redeeming the time. That redemption has the idea of buying out, buying back, redeeming the time, redemption of salvation for a slave that was bought out of the slave market. We are to redeem the time. We're all given the same 24 hours. Unfortunately, not all of us use our 24 hours the right way. Probably one of the most guilty ones. And so trying to struggle every day to use my time according to what the Lord has. There's 2 areas that are very important. And I think this is and especially in the area of business. Number one is the ability to serve. The greatest thing I think about in the business area is to come alongside with the skills and talents God has given in the area of business, not to dictate. And probably one of the greatest irritations that happened to me about 15 years ago, actually 16 years ago, when I was out of ministry. And somebody in the church came up and said, I just happened to be the comptroller at the time, the ministry, large ministry. And they said to me, "You're the money man. You get to you write all the checks and you do all the stuff. And I stopped and I said, no, I am put in a place of service to come alongside to help those in leadership make the right decision with the information. That philosophy has carried me through for the last 20 years, in addition to even here at the convention, coming along and serving our board, serving our churches for what? For the purpose of having integrity in what God has given us to go out to evangelize, to go out to serve others. Because that comes to the second part about mentoring. It is always a reminder for us in life, there should be three levels of mentoring that we should be dealing with. Number one, we should have somebody like a Paul, somebody who's mentoring us. In fact, one of the gentlemen that I take very seriously that has mentored me through my time at the convention, his first name of all things is Paul. Now he has more time in the convention than I have even thought about. And he's taken the time out of his life because his heart is to do right in the area of business for the convention. Somebody you should be mentoring, have somebody above you as a Paul. Then you should have somebody as a Timothy, somebody that you're looking to invest in. And sometimes that investment is as simple as coming alongside to answer questions. And even if you would say, put your arm around, you're mentoring, you're giving those opportunities. If you don't have someone, find someone. That's the great opportunity about being in business, always being aggressive, always being the ability to go step out. It is interesting. Have you ever asked people questions like this? I have done this several times in churches. Hey, can you tell me for 30 seconds what you learned spiritually? Hey, give me something you learned spiritually in the past week. And the looks that sometimes I get from people like, why are you asking that question? That is part of mentoring, to be allowed for people to give praise to God as they work in their lives. That is part of that mentoring process. The great thing is then there's a peer level. That's the third level of mentoring, which would be like a Barnabas that came alongside Paul to be equals. I am very blessed to be as part of a team, to be mentored along in different areas. I'm also very thankful that we have great pastors within our convention that have mentored me as being part of the convention. And I think this is important as we talk about the business side is our roles in business, the business side of ministry is very crucial in how we serve and especially how we mentor. There's going to be a lot of time that is spent behind the scenes that nobody will ever know. That is probably the hardest thing about ministry, especially if you're trying to keep the books, you're trying to get things up to speed. It just doesn't come together just like that. There's time involved. That is part of mentoring. That is part of serving, which then leads us to, if you notice, that's 75% of this. So if that's 75% of dealing with stewardship, the last one is definitely treasure, how we use the resources. Number one, let me take the second word, generosity. When we look at the resources God has given us physically, emotionally, mentally, it's very important to understand with generosity, we pass that along. I look past the dollar sign. And what I mean by that is everybody thinks people who give a lot are very generous. But really, again, what does it come down to about giving? It isn't about the physical act that is done, even though that is part of it. It is about the heart and that heart relationship to God on the physical items that He's given me and how generous in what He's given me knowledge, whether He's given me abilities to do something. It's that generosity to know that I can help alongside and may not even get recognized that I helped alongside. This last part of stewardship, again, understand the definition of stewardship. And that stewardship is, again, God has given everyone a limited amount of resources, just like the owner of the house would pass on to a slave or someone who would be the manager, house manager of the house. there was a limited amount of resources to do what? To parcel out accordingly to the needs of those in the house. Reminder again, there are going to be periods of profit and there are going to be periods of losses, if I would use the term in the sense of a business sense. What does that mean? There are going to be times when the church will flourish spiritually, financially, relationally, and there are going to be times the church is going to struggle financially, relationally, spiritually. But it's through that stewardship to be able to be even keel and have our focus on what God has for us in the area of business to come alongside, especially those in pastoral leaderships, deacon leaderships, or if you're on a stewardship or finance. These are important because as you communicate this as representatives and serving the congregation as a whole, these terms, these thoughts are always critical in how we serve and how we look at God's resources. If you're interested in some of the other part with the stewardship, I have several lessons I would be more than willing to share. Now, as part of that stewardship, let me give you a couple things here. Number one, how do you move forward? How do you move forward with what God has given you? Number one, you always will be analyzing the situation. Number two, you always will need to align your focus. Well, how do you align your focus? Sometimes, just like in football, which I am very thankful that the Ohio State Buckeyes are back in gear in Big Ten football. My wife loves me now because I can now be bearable because Ohio State's playing, especially this past weekend. But in part of football, where there's a lot of fancy schemes, sometimes you have to get back to the simple basics. As Vince Lombardi once said of the Green Bay Packers, that football comes down to two fundamental resources. Number one, the blocking, and then tackling. The offense is always blocking because if they're successful, they can score, or if the defense is successful because they've tackled. But they align their focus. The focus for us will be spiritually, first back on Christ, and then aligning our focus on who we are. A lot of churches sometimes will misalign themselves and get involved in other things outside the church, and they forget the purpose of why they are in existence in the first place. Third is to allocate our resources, what God has given us, the steps to move forward, to be able with wisdom, to be able to take what God has given us and to allocate it out appropriately. In some ministries, it's going to maybe have to deal with the personnel, the pastor, taking care of the needs of the pastors. Hey, can I throw this in for the business people tonight? Look at your pastors, please. I know a lot of our churches are struggling right now because giving has been down or different things there. But take and stop and look at the resources God has given. And sometimes a lot of our pastors who are very dependent upon God, and I know that, would never really turn around and ask. Sometimes us in the business areas have to be mindful of those things, to listen, to see how God is working in the lives, and especially if our pastors or those in the church may be struggling because of the challenges we have. And then lastly, accelerate. What I mean, sometimes it just, you got to put your foot on the gas and go. Now, some of us who've learned how to drive, it wasn't until we actually put our foot on the gas that the car started going. You realize, and now I'm learning, especially as a 16-year-old, this is like, oh my, this is something there. But you know what? Once you were going, you understood what you were, all the components, the gas, the brake, the steering wheel, the windshield wipers, whatever you needed, you were moving forward. You were accelerating. I give you all that as a background to think about in regards, especially with, we talked about with governing documents, the way the church is moving, to understand who you are, your mission statement, the vision statement, where you're going, and then ultimately how you're going to get there. It is interesting within our own denomination. And I realize that there may be others that, as part of the Southern Baptist Convention, and tonight again, I'm not going to be getting into all the different things that may be going on, but I do know this, that the Southern Baptist Convention is a lot of us have affiliated, have both a historical background with the Southern Baptist Convention, and we as Southern Baptists are looking to serve throughout the years. And again, there have been different ways that churches have done, especially in a group exemption, of which we talked about last week, about partnering together, churches that are partnering together, maybe denominationally, and in that hierarchical system, they figure out how they're going to fund missions. How are they going to get missionaries out? How are they going to train the next generation? I would ask you this question. You may know what your church's missional statement is, but do you know what the mission statement of the SBC is? If you're part of the Southern Baptist Convention, a lot of our churches have not gone back to the aligning their focus and understanding what is it about the Southern Baptist Convention. Let me just do this here for you. The mission statement of the Southern Baptist Convention states this: as a convention of churches, our missional vision is to present the gospel of Jesus Christ to every person in the world and to make them disciples of all the nations. It is again within a denomination of a structure, a group structure, that we are partnering together for the gospel. It is important to understand that, how the Lord is allowing us to pull through a historical sense of resources to put missionaries out. As some of you may have seen here just recently, the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention, in strengthening that relationship, and I'm going to share our vision statement as the end, is that we have formed a partnership with the International Mission Board and being the first state convention to do that. What is that purpose for? It's aligning our vision along with the Southern Baptist Convention to do what? To present the gospel of Jesus Christ to every person in the world. Our focus as a convention, as Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention, is he's given us a region that's known as the Pacific Asia area. And what great opportunities as we set as a church, as we partner together for the work of the gospel, then you can start to see what is the vision of the Southern Baptist Convention. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can read through this again. Being fully committed to the proposition that Jesus Christ is our only hope for the world, and believing Southern Baptists are yearning for spiritual renewal and Christ-centered living, and recognizing the challenge of Jesus to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, we, the underside of the Southern Baptist denominational leaders, covenant with each other and every willing Southern Baptist under God to make the kingdom of God the priority in our own personal lives, to dedicate the energies and resources of the ministries we lead to seeking first the King and his kingdom, to cooperate with each other and the family of the Southern Baptists as we pursue kingdom principles and practices, to give ourselves of servant leadership that will assist and enable local churches in the ministry, to pray that a new passion for Jesus breaks out among our people, our families, and our churches, from which God can forge a spiritual movement marked by holy living, sacrificial service, and a global witness. To this end, we affirm empowering kingdom growth as a call for Southern Baptists to seek first the King and his kingdom. Now, why do I just say that? I say that because that, as a denominational, as a big picture, if we state as a church that is under the Southern Baptist Convention, we should understand what the vision as a denomination is. Now, they're looking at it on a bigger scale. There are about 45,000 Southern Baptist churches throughout the world. I think it's 45,000 I could be incorrect. I heard 54, but not everybody's filled out their ACP report. Um, that tells us if everybody statistically was on hand what we were at. Um, the key thing is to understand they have a vision for all the churches. Now, the great part of this structure is if I ask you, how is that carried out from a big picture? How is it denominationally carried out to the local church and to somebody who's sitting in the church going, how do I give to the Southern Baptist Convention? Do I give my tithes and offerings? Do I do, where does this all come into play? If I ask you to explain that, could you explain it? And what struggle is, most of our churches um, have either forgotten, need a little refresher, or because God has allowed others who have come into our churches, who serve Him, who preach the word, who do all these things, may not understand the history. I'll be honest. I came into the Southern Baptist Convention about 5 years ago. Did I have the full understanding of how cooperative program and the focus of missions was? Absolutely not. But that doesn't mean I was different. I was used to a different system for missions. Most missionaries that I was involved with, they had to go individually and raise their own support. They could be on deputation to go raise their own support for 4 to 5 years before they even raise enough to even have to go to a foreign field. The Southern Baptist Convention, over almost 100 years ago, came up with a methodology, and there's nothing, I'll say this carefully, there's nothing solid biblically that 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 this can't be changed or modified. But there are a lot of biblical principles within this methodology for the sake of missionaries. And one of the great things is that the system that is set up by which our churches participate in our convention, the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention, is involved with, helps do what that vision is all about. Getting those out there to preach the word, to train, to be able to see God. We see people get evangelized, and we see people to get edified. I did up this little chart. I'm a flow chart guy. So if I'm up here at the church here, how do I, as a person in the church, help give for the bigger cause of missions? If I asked you that question, could you explain it? Because ultimately, when we come to week 4 about budgeting, one of the key things about budgeting for missions is or your whole budget is for the area of missions. Are you supporting missions in your local church? Are you supporting missions on a convention-wide, a state convention, but ours is unique in that we have not just the state of Hawaii, but we have Asia and Pacific, and then look at the bigger picture as a whole. In a nutshell, what it is, and let me just kind of walk through this. Most of you may know this already, but I'd like to just kind of explain this out. So I'm a church member who the Lord has allowed me to give whatever He feels that I should be giving in my giving. Upon that, that's where the church makes a determination of how they're going to give for the bigger cause of missions. Please understand that. It is not a tax. It's not an assessment on the church. And each church voluntarily gives to the bigger cause of missions. Missions is our driving force. We do things for missions. We are training people for mission field. We are supporting missionaries. In the bigger picture, the Southern Baptist Convention has set up several different agencies for the purpose of missions. If you can see in the middle of this chart, there are four consistent areas for the purpose of missions. Number one, a state convention. The Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention is one of 41 state conventions for the purpose of coordinating local churches in that area to gather the resources to be able to do missions locally. We work with a lot of our churches by that affiliation. And then secondly, to work nationally with the other entities. That's why a church will, as a collection, will collect those um, tithes and offerings, and as a decision by that local church to be able to send a portion of that to the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention on behalf of missions. Please understand this, and this is where that group exemption concept really comes out, because as part of the group exemption, as part of identifying as a Southern Baptist church or identifying with the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention, just like a member goes through a process to become a member of a church, same thing with our churches, that they want to be part of the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention. In our Constitution, it states what a Hawaii Pacific Baptist Church will look like or identify themselves in the bigger thing. There's 4 areas that are associated with that vetting process that a church would like to associate or affiliate with the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention. Number 1, there's a theological. There is usually an agreed upon doctrine that the church will go by. Most will use the Baptist Faith and Message, one of the versions, as their guideline. That is one of the items that's associated with it. Secondly, there's an intention that they want to affiliate. They want to partner with sister churches. That is what the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention is about. It is not about a staff or individuals sitting in Honolulu doing the things that we are. We are servants of our churches, of 160 some odd churches that are, some are churches, some are missions, some are gathering together. That is we're representing those churches on behalf of those churches. That is part of the missional part of this. So as a church gathers, they'll give through the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention. As part of that, the second areas is the 2 mission boards. In the middle, you see that there are 2 mission boards. Number 1, you see the one that's North American Mission Board. Their focus is missions in what used to be called the Home Mission Board, which was North America, the United States, and then Hawaii, the 50 states, along with some of Guam was part of that. So they would focus on sending missionaries for home missions, North American Mission Board. There's also the foreign component. The foreign component would be the International Mission Board, which is made up of several sub areas, of which we have 2 that's within our area of the convention. The East Asia Affinity Group, which would include Japan, Korea, those churches there. And then we also have Southeast Affinity, which also would be Thailand and the Philippines. And so for these areas of missions, these 2 main mission boards do what? They're designed to vet, to train, and to send missionaries out for the purpose of planting churches, presenting the gospel, whether in the United States or also around the world. The last part you see there is the 6 seminaries. The Southern Baptist Convention has 6 seminaries by which they train the individuals and pastors and those for further their education and theological studies. The great thing is we have a great relationship with 2 of them specifically, a Gateway, which is in California, and also Southwestern, which is in Texas, of which we have people, and we have several other, the seminaries, Southern, Southeastern, Midwest, and I know I'm missing one. These are 6 seminaries located throughout the United States for the purpose of training, education. Then you see there's 2 other different entities there. There's the Religious Liberties Commission, ERLC, which goes on behalf of Southern Baptists for areas dealing with legislation or some of those things for religious liberties. And then you actually have what we call the Executive Committee, their operations. Out of that, what happens now is a church collects and sends their items. They will send it to the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention. We as a collection agency, and each year, being part of the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention, there's a vote by the messengers as part of the budgetary process of how much stays here for the missions of Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention, and then what is passed along to the executive committee for which that goes and funds missions. Please note, the 20%, so it's an 80-20%. So 80% stays as part of our Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention for the purpose of serving the churches and being able for missions locally. 20% goes on to be distributed by the executive committee for these areas. 50% goes to the International Mission Board. That's important to know. So if we pass along $100 to the executive committee, 50 is going back to IMB for the sake of what? Missions, supporting missionaries, supporting missional work. That goes to that. 22%, about 22, 23% goes to the North American Mission Board. So almost 75% of all cooperative program monies, which is the general collection, goes and then that goes to the executive committee, is now going back in the area of missions. About 18% of that also goes to the seminaries to help train, to help be able to keep the tuition low for the purpose of helping our pastors to continue their studies and also for theological training. This is why it's important as you understand the process, understand what the mission is, the vision, and the goals and objectives. This is how these collections that are given from the churches goes and helps for the area missions. Now, if you notice, there are 4 arrows that I have here that churches can also give directly in behalf of missions. There are certain times of the year. At Easter time this year, there's the Annie Armstrong Easter offering. What that is all about is that is collections for specifically North American Mission Board missions that gets collected, sent directly as part of North American Mission Board to go back and support the missionaries. During Christmas time, which we're coming up in December here pretty soon, there will be what we call the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. And again, the collections that are from our churches that are specifically for the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, or during the year, if a church decides they want to give specifically to the International Mission Board, we take those collections and send them for directly to be given to the International Mission Board. I want to say this as part of our convention. I am very thankful that our churches many times over, our churches last year, through all the offerings that they gave $1.7 million towards missional work. That includes over $1 million towards cooperative program, almost $300,000 towards Lottie Moon and the International Mission Board, a little over about $150,000 that's associated with North American Mission Board. And then there's 2 other offerings. Number one, if you see in the middle here, there's this World Hunger. It's not as well known as the other offerings, but there are still churches that give towards World Hunger. This goes and helps like send relief and some of those items where food can be given back out. That when we get collections for World Hunger, 80% will go to the International Mission Board for their World Hunger program, and 20% will go with the North American Mission Board. You can see as a church and understanding the business side of ministry, it is very important to understand the structure by which we are putting the gospel out, how we are taking the resources God has given us as a church, as a state convention, as a national denomination, and serving God out that way. Now, if you notice, I didn't say one more offering. These are special offerings during the year that are collected. There is one more, and I would love to say, and that's the Sunishikawa offering, which was named after a saint. For many years, Sue was known for missions. She was a member of Olivet Baptist Church for many years, gave of herself many times over in the convention in 1981, if I remember correctly. This is before my time. They dedicated the state missionary offering in the name of Nishikawa. What's the state missionary offering do? During this past September, as we put out to many of our churches, and we had many of our churches across our convention that gave above and beyond, especially during the COVID-19, a lot of the different struggles that people had job wise, giving wise. Our churches gave. The great thing, for every dollar that comes in through the Sioux Nishikawa offering stays within the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention and goes back out to the churches, which is exactly why this partnership is so important, as being part of the bigger group and the partnership that we have. Why is it important? Because it's Hawaii Pacific Baptist churches helping other Hawaii Pacific Baptist churches. And many times do you see in the New Testament a sister church that Paul would go and meet and do what? Many times out, they would take a collection and they would have, through Paul, that ability to pass on to help another church at that time. A lot of our churches in the Hawaii Pacific Convention, I am humbled to know that we have within our convention those who give above and beyond, not just for the fact of giving, but they give because they realize the goal of us, the vision, the mission that we have as a convention is that Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention churches are coming together, that identification as a group, as a partner for what? The sake of the gospel to go out. And the great thing about our convention, the great thing about the Southern Baptist denomination is that when God is placed first, many ways the gospel goes out, the gospel gets, we get able to put resources in people's hands. And by the way, again, stewardship is not just money. Stewardship is giving the resources God has given us to the ability to serve along each other. And I think that's important. We've seen our churches come alongside. And maybe this is the preaching part of my lessons, because stewardship, the way we do things, isn't about the money. It's about the relationship of what God has given us for the sake of the gospel. Which I leave you with one more thing here, and I'll finish early tonight for some of you, which that may be a shock, and I'll open it up for questions here in just a second. I want to remind you, last year at the annual meeting, by the way, if you haven't marked your calendar, November 5th, 2020, at 3 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time, the release of the annual meeting this year. And please, please don't miss it. You talk about a great opportunity to see how God has worked throughout this year. It's unique, but you know what? Many times God has answered prayer on many different levels. But last year's annual meeting, when we met together, our executive board, which consists of 21 individuals from a variety of our different churches, along with the HPBC executive team, worked together to come up with the vision statement for the Hawaii Pacific Baptist Convention. This is where our goal and vision and how we've set the budget to move forward. And what is that? We see every Hawaii Pacific Baptist church working together to be not just followers, but to be leaders in impacting God's kingdom throughout the Pacific and Asia. When we take that vision statement and the goals that God is working in the lives of many people throughout our churches, it is very important for us to understand it starts with us as individuals. It starts with us in the business area, being able to be good stewards of the resources and talents God has given us for the sake of missions. It is those stewardship skills that the business side of ministry comes alongside the leadership as finance teams, stewardship teams, any part of teams, pastoral leadership, to come together, to partner, to listen, to be here. If you look at our convention as being some kind of big brother that just gives you dollars, you've missed the purpose of why we exist. I put all this out tonight to you as it's always on my heart, because if we just look at the mechanics of business, of ministry, we'll always forget the heart of ministry. Just as I said last week, there's two sides to the pendulum. There's the business side of ministry, and there's the ministry side of business. If the pendulum swings too hard on either side, if it goes to the business side, you lose the love. If you take it too hard on the ministry side, you miss the structure. It's that balance in between, and each ministry is different because God has placed different people in there. And my heart tonight, as we did this, is go back, evaluate your mission, your vision, your goals and objectives, along with the different areas that we've discussed. With that, I will now pause my presentation and open for questions.